Hello, and welcome to Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am your host, John Rothman. If you're a fan of the show, make sure to hit the follow button on the top right of Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening at this very moment. When you hit follow, leave a review or share an episode with a friend. It helps other people discover the show, keeps us going. So I like to point out each and every day, it expands our base. We won. That's what Donald Trump has told us about Iran. We have won the war. Well, I don't think that's exactly where we're at. All you have to do is take a look at what's going on to see that that is not true. Now, we have a lot to cover this morning, but I want to start with that. And I want to point out that we spent in just the opening days of the war $11 billion with a B dollars. Question becomes now, where is the money coming from? How much is this going to cost us? And what is the end result? We know that the price of oil is accelerating. We know that the Iranians say they are going to drive the price of oil to $200 a barrel. Now, they may not be able to do it, but the point is we are facing a disruption in the transfer of oil through the Strait of Hormuz to all over the world. Pure and simple. The reality of the Strait of Hormuz is that there is an effort by Iran to strangle us economically. Now, the president says, and his advisors say, we're going to correct the problem in the Strait of Hormuz. How? The talk of an armada being put together and opening the strait would be a fascinating development, but it doesn't seem that we have the traction to do it. Remember during the Biden years when a coalition was put together to keep the Red Sea operating despite Iranian disruption? That was a coalition of European nations, the United States, Middle East. Is Donald Trump trying to construct such a coalition today? And would people trust the United States and Donald Trump to put together such a coalition? Let me also speak bluntly about oil reserves. We've opened our oil reserves. We are now putting out from our oil reserves to try to hold everything in check. I don't know whether we can or we can't, but I can tell you we're going to do it, and we're doing it now. I want to say a word, if I can, about what happened with the girls' school. You will note that originally President Trump said the Iranians did it. There was some talk the Israelis did it. There was some talk that somehow something went wrong. But now we know it was an American Tomahawk missile. And I am waiting for the President of the United States to stand up and say it was an error. Now, we're told there was an error, that the intelligence used may not have been up to date. But whatever the case may be, the President of the United States has an obligation to assume full responsibility for what happened. Because this is a president who assumes responsibility when he succeeds, but seems somehow to transfer failure to someone else. I must say a word about sleeper cells. We are told that there are sleeper cells which Iran is going to activate. Indeed, the FBI put out a report that the West Coast might be vulnerable, and indeed, Los Angeles might be hit. There is no doubt that this is a serious matter. I'm reminded that during World War II, after Pearl Harbor, that the Doolittle raids on Japan, created the illusion, at first, of American response. And then the full weight of the American response was felt, and of course, the Japanese had to surrender unconditionally in 1945. But the simple truth of the matter is that we don't know whether or not we can, in fact, make a difference in terms of what is happening now. Let's assume for a minute that you are the Iranian fanatics. You've seen your leader, supreme leader, killed. You've seen your country decimated. Wouldn't you want to do what, frankly, the United States did in 1941, when we hit back with the Doolittle raids and showed that there was a vulnerability? that Japan had. And I think the Iranians would like to be able to do the same thing to the United States. There is great concern in this country about drones being fired from ships in the Pacific, or a ship in the Pacific, or any ship anywhere. There's also the concern about sleeper cells in this country who might move to effectively respond in some way. Hit the American homeland. That may be what the Iranians are interested in doing. And of course, it isn't just an organized action. It's the sleeper cells. It's one individual or two individuals who get together and say, we have to protect Iran, and this is the way we'll do it. I only want to point out to you, in the most clear and precise fashion, that what Donald Trump has suggested is just plain wrong. We haven't won the war. Now, if by winning a war he means with our own military might, we have been able to cripple much of Iran's infrastructure, that's true. But the war is not won. Just take a look at what is happening now in the Strait of Hormuz, where ships are being attacked, where fires are being lit, where we clearly have not won. I point this out because I want everyone to understand we are not at the end of what we have initiated. This is really the end of the beginning. As Winston Churchill once said, using that phrase, it isn't the end, it isn't the beginning of the end, it is the end of the beginning. And where this leads, no one knows. What we do know is that massive amounts of money, billions of dollars, are going to be spent in this activity. We know more than that the United States is, in fact, at war. We know that, and I regret to say this, that we cannot trust the news coming from the administration, that the administration makes claims which simply aren't valid. All you have to do is take a listen to what Pete Hegseth says. Secretary of Defense? This guy doesn't know what's going on. And I say that because I listen to him. I listen to the contradictions coming out of the Defense Department. Yes, the Defense Department, not the War Department. We don't have a War Department in this country. There are real concerns, and every day this situation expands and grows. We now have a regional conflict. And you will note, please, that the United Nations has called for Iran to cease hitting its neighbors. Of course, as soon as the resolution passed, Iran was still hitting its neighbors. It is interesting to note that the United Nations doesn't pass a resolution calling for Iran to stop attacking Israel, and never has. There is a hypocrisy here. I'm a great fan of the United Nations. I always have been. It was founded here in San Francisco. You know that I am the biographer, one of the biographers of Harold Stassen, who was the last living signer of the Charter of the United Nations. And Governor Stassen was very proud of his involvement in the creation of that agency. But clearly, the United Nations is not living up to where it should be. I would not abandon the UN, not at all. The structure is there. But I would say that you can see the impotence of the UN very, very clearly. By the way, does anybody know who our ambassador to the United Nations is? That's a good question. There was once a time when an Eisenhower put Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. in, or when Kennedy put Adlai Stevenson in, or when Lyndon Johnson put in Arthur Goldberg. There was a time when the leadership of the United States and the United Nations was symbolized by who we had as our representative. The man we have as our representative now is hardly a symbol of American might, power, or trust. He actually got the job because he messed up as national security advisor. And I won't repeat the story, but I just want to point that out to you. There is more that we are going to cover in terms of what is happening. And of course, the news is breaking every single hour, and we will try to cover it as best we can in our broadcasts. But there is another issue that I want to raise with you. Are you aware that Donald Trump, once again, is raising the question of who really won the 2020 2020 election. The winner of the 2020 election, Donald Trump, was not you. It was Joe Biden. And the simple fact is that now the Arizona ballots from the 2020 election have been seized by Trump. What's the logic behind that? He wants to prove that there was fraud, and yet investigation after investigation has proven there was no fraud. And I want to remind you that Donald Trump's lead attorney, Rudy Giuliani, took this to court more than 60 times and failed every time because the election was a fair election. And Donald Trump saying all of these things about it not being fair is hardly true. And so I want you to understand very clearly that we have a president with a real problem. And more, the president has now decided that he is going to implement his tariffs. He's just going to go a different route in order to secure his tariffs. In other words, he's going to thumb his nose at the United States Supreme Court, and he's going to try to find an alternative method in order to implement his tariffs. By the way, if he can't implement his tariffs, he's got a financial problem. The United States has a financial problem because we collected money then under false pretenses. But for this president to try to go around the United States Supreme Court is no surprise. His aide said, if the Supreme Court ruled that way, we'll find another way. But when you have a president who disregards the rule of law, we have a problem, a severe problem. Had Richard Nixon tried to go around the Supreme Court in 1974 in the United States versus Richard Nixon, imagine what the outcry would have been, and properly so. There are many issues involved in the Trump administration now which cause me great concern. I also want to point out that the Epstein files continue to be a major issue, and the administration is still not in compliance with the vote of the Congress, House and Senate. This is a president who seems determined to defy the law, and that to me is of deep concern. I want to say one other thing, and that has to do with vaccines. I mentioned it the other day, but I want to do it again. The information that Robert F. Kennedy has been putting out on vaccines is clearly wrong. The fact that there are administration officials now discouraging people from getting the COVID shot is, to me, nuts. And interestingly enough, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s advisory committee has said, get the shot. But have you heard the Secretary of Health and Human Services stand up and say anything in reflecting on this? And the answer is no. He continues with what I would only call nonsense. In short, we have a fascinating moment here. And within the Republican Party, there needs to be a thorough debate on the future of the party dealing with Donald Trump. I reminded you yesterday that Donald Trump Jr. stood on the ellipse on January 6th and said, the Republican Party is dead. We now have a party, the party of Donald Trump. This is, again, something that I think is so critical, and that is that we need to have a Republican Party that stands up and demands accountability, whether it is on what is happening in the war, which is a war, Speaker Johnson, whether it is when it comes to the Epstein files, whether it comes to our thoughts about how we're going to pay for this adventure by Donald Trump, whether it is the question of the Strait of Hormuz and how it's going to be opened, whether it has to do with the 2020 election, the Arizona ballots being seized, the tariff question. In short, there are a lot of issues on the table. I've only touched on a few, but we will have the opportunity in the weeks ahead to talk more about what is going on. And that will be our goal on Around the Political World with John Rothman. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Around the Political World. I'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode. You can write a review on Apple Podcasts, drop a comment on YouTube or Spotify, click any of the links in the show notes to connect with me on social media. And of course, tomorrow is Friday. I will do an additional question and answer session, which I must say we've received such positive feedback. So send your comments. GoGo will put them together for us and we'll proceed. I also want to ask you to remember to share this episode with a friend or colleague so we can continue to grow and expand, which of course is our goal. And of course, this show's been getting so much positive attention that we're excited to bring on the advertising support that is going to grow. I want to say a special word of thanks to GoGo Zoger. We had some technical issues in terms of posting over the last several days. GoGo solved the problems. Thank you all for emailing me and letting me know that you're delighted that we're up and running. And may I say, well, this is the world in which we live. There are always technical glitches. But with GoGo Zoger at my side, I have no doubt that all will be well. That's it for today. I will be back tomorrow, and we will continue Around the Political World with John Rothman. See you then.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.